fascination, and freakery. Laws that sought to reduce the visibility of problem bodies, including cross-dressing law, constituted a dense legal matrix that dictated the types of bodies that could move freely through city space and the types of bodies that could not. However, such laws could also incite cultural fascination and the desire to see, which entrepreneurs could exploit. One manifestation of this was the popular commercial Slumming Tour, in which tourists were guided through the Barbary Coast and Chinatown to glimpse the bodies that the law sought to conceal. These tours took in brothels, opium dens, dive bars, and sick rooms housing Chinese patients who were banned from the city's hospital. Another manifestation was the newspaper scandal, which splashed cross-dressing practices across the front page as local editors ran sensational stories and interviews with those who broke the law. These scandals publicized normative gender boundaries and ridiculed transgressors, representing gender difference as a titillating private eccentricity or individual moral flaw. However, the starkest manifestation of this cultural fascination was the Dime Museum Freak Show, which displayed non-normative bodies and cross-gender performances in seeming conflict with the law. Dime Museum freak shows emerged as a popular form of entertainment in most major U.S. cities after the Civil War, peaking in popularity during the 1880s and 1890s. As one component of the era's new mass entertainment industry, dime museums had their socioeconomic roots in technological, demographic, and economic changes that led to an unprecedented rise in leisure time among working-class and middle-class city residents. Similar to municipal law, the Dime Museum Freak Show was preoccupied with the public appearance of non-normative bodies and offered a variety of attractions for the low price of a dime, including human anatomy exhibits, lectures on morality, sideshow circus artists, and freak show performers. Most studies of dime museums and freak shows have focused on East Coast institutions, with particular emphasis on P.T. Barnum's American Museum in New York. San Francisco, however, boasted numerous freak shows of its own, ranging from the short-lived Museum of Living Wonders, which operated out of a leaky tent on Kearny Street in the early 1870s, to the grand exhibitions held at Woodward's Gardens, an expansive family amusement resort that occupied 2 city blocks in the Mission District from 1866 to 1891. Most of the city's freak shows, however, were clustered on Market Street, operating out of small, seedy, rented storefronts. Market Street was also home to the Pacific Museum of Anatomy and Science, the city's longest-running dime museum, which claimed to be the largest anatomical museum in the world. In San Francisco, as elsewhere, dime museum entertainment centered upon performances of bodily difference and paid particularly close attention to bodies that challenged gender, racial, and national boundaries, or that ostensibly revealed the somatic penalties of immorality through spectacles of disease or deformity. For example, freak shows typically featured a bearded lady or half-man, half-woman character, while anatomy exhibits included hermaphrodite bodies, such as that of the Pacific Museum's display of a beautiful dissection of a hermaphrodite cadaver, featuring the internal arrangements and dissections of this wonderful freak of nature. Another staple attraction was the popular Missing Link, or What Is It exhibit, which usually featured an African American or a white man in blackface who was presented as the missing link between man and animal. Many dime museums also featured pathology rooms that contained displays of diseased sexual organs and other body parts, damaged by syphilis, gonorrhea, and the filthy habit of self-abuse. Finally, dime museums regularly staged performances of racialized national dominance that corresponded to contemporary wars. One of the first crowd-drawing exhibits at the Pacific Museum of Anatomy and Science, for example, was the preserved head of Joaquin Murrieta, the notorious Mexican bandit who fought against Anglo dominance and violence in the Southern California gold mines before being killed by state-sponsored rangers in 1853. Murrieta was a popular symbol of Mexican resistance, and the display of his severed head graphically dramatized a narrative of Anglo dominance and Mexican defeat against the backdrop of the Mexican War. Occasionally, Dime Museum exhibits explicitly linked gender and national boundary transgressions, as when Barnum's American Museum displayed a waxwork figure of Jefferson Davis, the defeated leader of the Southern Confederacy, wearing women's clothing at the close of the Civil War. This exhibit dramatized rumors that Davis had disguised himself in hoop skirts when trying to escape his northern captors, deploying cultural anxieties about cross-gender practices to emasculate the defeated South, fortify territorial boundaries, and reconsolidate the post-war nation. As this brief review suggests, the freak show and the law shared a set of cultural anxieties concerning the shifting boundaries of gender, race, health, and the nation, and the disparate bodies gathered on the freak show stage eerily mirrored the bodies targeted by municipal law: the sexually ambiguous, the indecent, the racialized, and the diseased. However, the relationship between the two institutions was complex, not least because the law prohibited the public visibility of problem bodies, while the freak show required their public display. These complexities are illustrated by the case of one man who navigated both legal prescriptions and freak show visibility in 1890 San Francisco, Milton Matson. In early January 1895, Matson was arrested in San Francisco in the room of his fiancée, Ellen Fairweather, and charged with obtaining money under false pretenses. Matson was taken to San Jose County Jail and locked up in a cell with several other men, where he remained for 2 weeks, until the jailer received a bank telegraph addressed to Miss Louisa Matson and realized that Matson was female. After complicated legal wrangling, charges against Matson were dropped, and he walked free from the jail in men's clothing, returning to San Francisco the following month. The exposure of Matson's true sex generated a mass of newspaper coverage, and the San Francisco dailies ran numerous stories on this male impersonator, or pretender, as Matson was described. In these stories, the press excitedly debated the possibility of Matson's arrest under cross-dressing law and reported that he publicly dared the police to arrest him. Before this could happen, Matson was approached by a local dime museum manager, Frank Clifton, and offered work, sitting upon a museum platform wearing men's clothing for the public to view. In need of employment and money, particularly since the press had undermined his ability to live as a man, Matson accepted Clifton's offer. The strangeness of this transition, from a cell in the San Jose prison to the electric brilliancy of an amusement resort, was not lost on Matson, who commented, "Funniest thing, I'm getting letters from all sorts of showmen offering good salaries if I will exhibit myself. It amuses me very much. I'm beginning to think it pays to be notorious. It certainly does not seem to be a detriment to people in America." The appeal of Matson's notoriety proved so popular that several other local freak shows began featuring cross-dressed performers, deceptively advertised as the only genuine Miss Martson in male attire. Given the punitive forces impinging on cross-dressing practices in 19th century 1800s San Francisco, and the law's insistence on removing them from public view, the concurrent display of cross-dressing performers in city freak shows is initially perplexing. On the one hand, these institutions operated according to very different logics. The law imprisoned, the freak show displayed. The law deprived its subject, the freak show offered a salary. The law disapproved and sought to reduce its subject's deviance. The freak show was fascinated and sought to exaggerate and increase it. On the other hand, the operations of cross-dressing law and the freak show overlapped. After all, Matson was recruited into freak show entertainment directly from a jail cell, following a path that other San Francisco performers had walked before him. Moreover, Matson's participation in a freak show exhibition regulated his offstage behavior in a very direct way. His contract forbade him to wear men's clothing on San Francisco streets to preserve the mystique and profitability of his show. Consequently, although the law and the freak show operated through distinct logics of concealment and display, they could have similar regulatory effects on freak show performers. The freak show also paralleled cross-dressing law as a normalizing discourse that communicated to audiences, in starkly visual terms, the parameters of acceptable behavior and the penalties for violating these norms. While there are few historical records that speak to the disciplinary impact of cross-dressing performers on freak show audiences, a popular 1890s dime novel is highly suggestive of possible effects. In Archibald Gunter and Fergus Redmond's A Florida Enchantment of 1891, a wealthy white woman, Lillian Travers, purchases a box of African sex change seeds from a dime museum in Florida. Following an argument with her fiancé, she swallows a seed and transitions into a man named Lawrence Talbot. Realizing that a wealthy man needs a male valet rather than a female housekeeper, Lawrence forces his mulatto maid, Jane, to also swallow a seed and become a man named Jack. Lawrence later realizes with fearful horror that dime museums would love to exhibit him as a freak, and he has a nightmare in which the city is covered in gigantic dime museum posters, advertising him as the freak of all ages and the woman man, appearing alongside the living skeleton and the missing link. Although doubly fictional, first as appearing in a novel, second as appearing as a dream, this scene illuminates the operations of the freak show in two specific ways. First, by illustrating Lawrence's horror at the prospect of being displayed as a freak, the nightmare suggests that freak show visibility could have disciplinary effects, operating as a threat against gender transgression and an inducement to conform. Second, the context of Lawrence's nightmare within the novel suggests that the disciplinary effects of freak show visibility were informed by racialized anxieties rather than by a universal fear of being labeled freak. Specifically, Lawrence's nightmare occurs after he has already entered a dime museum to purchase sex change seeds from Africa, and after he has learned that his former maid, now Jack, has begun working at a dime museum as the greatest freak on earth. Additionally, the poster from his nightmare suggests that part of the horror of being displayed as the woman man is appearing alongside and in association with the racialized missing link character and the deformed living skeleton. Indeed, throughout the novel, the dime museum appears as a racialized site that serves as both the source of gender transgression, sex change seeds from Africa, and the space of its containment. This suggests that the potential disciplinary effects of freak show visibility were intricately connected to its association with imperial exoticism and racialized difference. Finally, freak shows worked in tandem with cross-dressing law by producing not only disciplined audiences schooled in gender normativity, but also vigilant audiences trained in the pleasures of suspicion. The possibility of being duped was central to dime museum entertainment, and show managers encouraged audiences to gain pleasure from suspecting, confronting, and unmasking frauds. Performances of sexual and gender ambiguity were particularly susceptible to this suspicion. For example, the bearded lady's combination of feminine dress and masculine facial hair confronted audiences with a fascinating gender dilemma. Was this a woman who pushed the female body beyond recognizable femininity, or was this a man in drag? Visitors sought to resolve this dilemma by prodding at flesh, tugging at beards, and demanding to know the bearded lady's marital and maternal status. Freak show managers encouraged this questioning and occasionally brought in experts to heighten the drama. At New York's American Museum, for example, P.T. Barnum instigated a confrontation, one that ended in court, in which a freak show visitor accused a bearded lady of being male, only to be rebuffed by the latter's husband, father, and numerous doctors who testified that she was indeed female. Back in San Francisco, Matson's manager also went to court to sue rivals of his who allegedly featured fake Matsons in their shows. Far from resolving the gender confusion at hand, such events reminded audiences of their susceptibility to being duped. As such, freak shows not only reproduce the boundary between permissible and criminal gender displays that cross-dressing law policed, they also popularized and democratized this boundary, turning audiences into aware and vigilant judges of possible gender fraud. Despite their different modes of operation, cross-dressing law and the freak show performed similar cultural work in 19th century 1800s San Francisco as techniques of normalization that strove to produce clear, recognizable boundaries between normative and non-normative gender. Additionally, their mutual preoccupation with cross-dressing bodies did not occur in a vacuum, but was one part of a broader set of cultural concerns about the public visibility of problem bodies, particularly those marked by sexual immorality, race, and disease deformity. At the same time, however, freak show displays may have had unintended or ironic effects, particularly when the carefully managed distance between viewer and viewed broke down. As cultural scholar Rachel Adams has argued, freak shows were not only sites of disidentification and disavowal, where audiences secured a sense of normality through their spatial and existential distance from the freaks on stage, but were also sites of identification, where audiences recognized themselves in the freaks and the freaks in themselves. In part, this occurred because the meaning of the freak show performance, like the meaning of any text, was never completely fixed, but was open to multiple interpretations by different audiences. Moreover, as Adams points out, the interactive format of the freak show amplified the possibility of unintended interpretations, as it facilitated unscripted exchanges between disruptive audience members and the freaks who talked back. Such exchanges encouraged alternative readings of the freak show, not only among those who participated in them, but also among the wider audience who collectively observed an unintended show. Adams makes this argument in the context of discussing African American audiences who identified and unmasked racialized freak show performers as local people of color. Such identification, she claims, undermined the fantasy of complete otherness on which the freak show depended and dissolved the boundary between audience and performer, relocating the freak within the community of onlookers. However, in the context of gender freaks, particularly Mattson, the politics of identification could take a slightly different turn through identifications and desires that did not relocate the freak within the audience, but attracted the onlooker to the cross-gender performer on stage. This attraction could be fueled by a shared sense of female masculinity. After all, Mattson was not the only female-bodied person to live as a man in 1890 San Francisco. It could also be fueled by an erotic desire for the cross-gender performer, particularly one such as Mattson, who had described the pleasures of courting women in the pages of the city press. There is, unfortunately, scant evidence of such identifications and desires in relation to Mattson or other cross-dressed freak show performers, as the voices of those who may have appropriated freak discourse in this manner have not made their way into the archive. However, neglecting this possibility because of insufficient evidence may be more problematic than raising it unsupported by positive proof, as it replicates the structure of the archive, amplifying some voices and silencing others. Within the archive, the voice of the newspaper reporter is prominent. A San Francisco Examiner reporter described Mattson's Dime Museum exhibit as follows: "Her part will not be a difficult one. She will be faultlessly attired in patent leathers, a handsome dress suit, embroidered linen, and a white tie. She will recline in an easy chair on a little platform and chat with the socially inclined, but whether she will divulge any of the interesting secrets connected with her numerous love episodes is not definitely known." Consequently, we can imagine the different ways that different audiences may have interacted with Mattson, with fascination and titillation perhaps, with discomfort and disdain, but also perhaps with identification, attraction, and desire. Conclusion. Through its focus on cross-dressing law, this essay has demonstrated the centrality of gender regulation to 19th century, 1800s, city life, and unearthed the hidden history of a law that has appeared in the footnotes of 20th century, 1900s studies, but has not yet been brought to the fore. The essay has also brought together subjects that rarely share the pages of academic inquiry, despite sharing San Francisco streets, male-bodied women and unsightly beggars, female-bodied men and sex workers, freak show managers, and city police. In doing so, I have argued that the policing of gender transgressions needs to be analyzed in relation to the policing of multiple forms of bodily difference, and that legal regulations need to be studied alongside cultural fascination. These analytic insights are crucial not only for a study of 19th century, 1800s cross-dressing law, but also for future studies of the production and regulation of normative gender.